Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the War Report. I'm not in my usual recording setup, so if I sound a bit different, apologies for that, but we got quite the episode ahead of us. Now, of course, we're recording this on a Thursday night right now. On Tuesday night, you may have heard there was a election in the United States for president, and let me just assure you, it went completely smoothly, no foul play, nothing suspicious afoot. Went completely legitimately, and we know the winner already, which, that's why I would say under normal circumstances, but alas, we are here. So, of course, the night started out pretty normally. The typical blue states got called for Biden, typical red states got called for Trump. Then came the swing states like Florida and Ohio, which got called for Trump. Then, of course, out west, the states got called like the Montana, Wyoming, Idaho. They got called for the Republicans. Your coastal states got called for the Democrats. Then things got very strange in a few places. Number one was Arizona, where they called it very early for Biden with very conspicuous voting patterns. Now, keep in mind, there were a lot of votes across this election. A lot of people voted early, whether that was through absentee ballots or voting early in person at designated offices. And that's also combined with election day itself, because, for example, when it came to Texas and Ohio and Florida, these big states, Biden was ahead at first because they counted the early ballots first, and then they counted the day of ballots, and that corrected the lead, especially in Florida and Ohio. Trump won Florida by like 4 points, which is unprecedented for Florida in general. It's usually razor thin. That's usually what the problems come down to. So you had that. And then, again, things got suspicious. He was leading in Michigan and Wisconsin. Then all of a sudden there's rapid spikes of ballots that are 100% for Biden. Nothing suspicious there at all. Absolutely not. I would never say, I would never peddle any misinformation or conspiracy theories because I'm not that kind of person. I trust the news. I trust the media. I trust what our government officials say. Now, that was conspicuous enough. And then they still haven't called states that Trump is clearly the one, like, for example, North Carolina is another one. And Georgia is where there seems to be some funky business with the current ballots right now, what they're trying to really maneuver around. And the other big one is Pennsylvania is the one that's up in the air. So the way it's been is Trump, to his credit, came out hard saying that, there's some funny business going on here. We may want some recounts. We may want to look into this. He's claiming several states have been won by him. Him and his campaign and his lawyers saying, look, we won these states, call them already. And, of course, he's calling for recounts in Arizona, calling to stop the counts in states like Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, which, of course, he flipped in 2016 because of the conspicuous things going on there. And Biden has been pretty quiet about it. Now, his team, his campaign, they've, of course, said, oh, we need to make sure every vote counts, all that kind of stuff. And, again, apparently Trump is holding rallies on Friday, so those will have happened by the time this premieres, and we'll see how those go. And people are speculating all sorts of things. They're speculating whether it's going to go to the court or not, whether this is going to, one of them is going to concede or not. But I do think it is strange. Now, don't get me wrong. I do think it's entirely possible that Trump could have squandered his gains from 2016 because we saw it with the 2018 congressional elections. The Republicans lost the House. They did pick up in the Senate, but that was more so due to the map layout. But what happened there in the House is, I think what mainly cost the Republicans was the healthcare issue. And you could reasonably make the case that in 2016, the states that he flipped, that maybe he just didn't perform as well as the people expected. Maybe they became despondent again. Trump lost 5% of the white male vote, which, again, it was the forgotten working class, which, again, usually translates to white man and, to a lesser extent, white woman, who ended up swinging for him. Now, I picked up in every other demographic, including white women, gays, blacks, Hispanics, etc., but he lost 5% among the white men. That's not necessarily saying they voted for Biden, but it is saying, they may have abstained this election. But where I get suspicious is that, especially with Wisconsin and Michigan, is that all across the country, the Republicans are picking up House seats. They haven't taken majority, but they've taken seats from the Democrats in the House. Secondly, he increased his margins in both key swing states such as Florida and especially Ohio for this case. So I see a bit of a logical look. I can accept that. Okay, maybe Trump underperformed. Maybe Trump underperformed as president, and that may turn off some of his voters. I know that I have been dissatisfied with him on many, many occasions. But what you had there is he picks up in Ohio, yet drops drastically in Michigan and Wisconsin. That is where I start to get suspicious. That's where it really doesn't add up for me.
Yeah, you know, Wisconsin is almost like a textbook example because they're claiming, depending on who you listen to, something like 89 or 80% turnout. And although this election has had amazing turnout, that seemed unbelievably high, and it was also one of those states where it had where it closed counting early, and then sometime around 4 a.m. Uh, a van appears, and there are over 100,000 ballots, and they're all for Biden. I mean, I don't want to overstate it.
Yeah, all for Biden and nothing down ballot, nothing for the Senate, nothing for the House, nothing for
Yes,
local offices. Very, very strange.
very strange, just for Biden, right? And I mean, I've even heard conspiracy theories like it was Bannon's boys that did that because it's going to go to the courts. In any case,
It
I
was the
guess
poor boys. Joe Biden tried to warn us.
poor but clever. So I guess what I'm trying to get at is, so voting fraud has been a thing for quite some time. There are very persuasive arguments that JFK was made president by voting fraud. So it's an ongoing thing, and I think
Perhaps
one
the
of the
most
things
contemporary example is Bush versus Gore, which just a
that's right,
fun fact about
right,
that. Pretty much the argument the Bush campaign made was that states are technically not obligated to hold a popular vote, and that the state government can assign the electors however they please. That being, of course, state legislators in collaboration with the governor. Now, again, typical electoral process. Governor has to sign off on it unless unless it's supermajority or 2/3 of the state legislature would vote for it. In which case, a lot of these states with Democratic governors, for example, in the Midwest, have the supermajority Republican legislation. So we could see an extreme example where it goes to that. But again, point being is electoral shenanigans, fraud, whatever you want to call it. I say, and there's a pretty big gap between those, but I don't know. I'd say in 2000 shenanigans versus outright fraud. What we're seeing here, yeah,
hmm
it's not unprecedented. It's nothing new, and that's not even to get into the primaries. Oh boy, let's talk about the 2016 primaries with the love him or hate him. You have to admit Bernie Sanders did get a raw deal.
yeah, he did, and I mean that's another kind of bone of contention that has been more or less resolved and memory hold already, and that is that Putin and the boys in St. Petersburg probably did not sway the election in 2016. That, in fact, it was probably had more to do with disgruntled Bernie voters
Oh
who either
yes, and just since you brought that up, we of course were at St. Petersburg Russian meddling headquarters on election night, and I will be uploading an archive of that stream with our good friend and former guest of the show, Vile Varangian, and that should be up either before or after this. So if you guys haven't seen that yet, you should definitely check it out. It was very fun. There were a lot of people on there. I was only one of two non-Slavs on there, so that should tell you all you need to know. And
yeah, you and Schizo, the Med Alliance.
yeah, yeah. Med-Slav Alliance is coming together, guys. Don't worry. This is the future.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I guess what I'm trying to get at is Republicans, I think, know that voter fraud is going to be a thing indefinitely because, you know, there's lots of things in our daily lives. Like you can check on your bank account. You can check on on your app that shows you how much data is being used. There's all kinds of technologies that can accurately count whatever it is that you want counted, right? But there isn't much of a will to do it. So we live in an age where many things are on a millisecond per millisecond basis constantly recounted. So the technology is there, and I know part of the deal is that every state does it a little bit differently, and sometimes that's looked at as a way of stopping voter fraud. But in a way, it also creates avenues and allows the possibility for a multitude of ways of committing voter fraud because it isn't centralized. I know that they both have their negatives. That is, if you learn one and you can subvert the an entire central counting system, then you can really skew things. But uh, the bottom line is it is what it is, and there isn't the will to even introduce something like voter ID. I mean, Canada and India have voter ID. You can't vote without your ID, and you can't vote with just one piece of ID either.
Oh yeah, I mean it's harder to you know go for just the most basic things in the United States. For example, getting on an airplane, whatever. It's harder to do that than it is to vote. Like
Yeah,
you need to show like your birth certificate, social security, whatever, all these different things, and it compared to like you can just show up in some states, a lot of deep blue states, at the ballot and say, "Oh, I don't have an ID. I just can't afford it. Can you please let me vote? Democracy. I gotta get my voice heard, guys. It's a sacrament at this point. You wouldn't deny me that, would you? Now, oh great priests of the temple of the gods of democracy, you wouldn't do that to me. I'm a good and faithful citizen. I'm here to vote. I mean, so yeah, it becomes sacrosanct at that point, to the point where you can't be denied under any circumstances, which is why you see the laws allowing felons to vote, which that didn't even flip Florida, which I was a bit surprised by that. But
yeah,
it
and
election
it's kind
security
of
in the United
ironic.
States is horrid, and it is funny because after the so-called Russian meddling in 2016, that led to several investigations into election security, and there were several holes and gaps. I mean, of course, none of which any foreign intelligence actually exploited beyond, of course, just Facebook ads. But it turned out to be a very like shooting yourself in the foot moment for the Democrats when they were complaining about this. But like in all these like deep blue precincts and counties and states, the election security was terrible.
Mhm. Yeah, and it's also kind of ironic that, like, I mean, I guess from a Canadian perspective, it would seem. I mean, I understand the American perspective as well. Don't get me wrong. This is something that's so um, uh, sanctified within American culture that you would have to. But from a Canadian perspective, if voting means that much to you, why wouldn't you be prepared for it? Like it becomes like something that the individual has to invest in, whereas I guess in America it's something that the state and basically the ideology of America itself requires that everyone can vote because no circumstance can stand in the way to prevent somebody from voting. That's how incredibly important voting is. But it's just a backdoor for fraud as well.
Yeah, it's if we can't, I mean, you almost have to respect the Democrats to the left from this point. The fact that they're willing to do what it takes to win, and one of my big reasons I am not too optimistic about Trump pulling this off is because I think he'll do what he needs to do, but I just have a gut feeling. I could be wrong. I'm fully willing to admit, like I said, I give it a 60-40 chance that Biden wins it through some sort of contested method, whether that be the courts, whether that be some other recount method. But I just don't think Trump will have the effort to push it. Now, I could be wrong. This could be like sort of a final straw moment for him where he says, I'm not giving up on this. This is rightfully mine, and we're going to push this until we win, which I do think under legitimate circumstances, Trump would have this in the bag. I think he actually would have probably, if not maintained, increases voter margins. But again, of course, this election was, less than clean and fair, as we can all admit. But at the end of the day, that's irrelevant because that has gone out the window. The chance for a fair election, quote unquote, it's gone. You've missed that ship. Now is the time to dig in your heels And of course, within a political sense, I don't want to, get in any trouble with anyone think I'm encouraging violence. You need to fight in the political arena, in the courts. You need to stand your ground because they're obviously not playing by the rules. They're not playing honestly. So you need to meet them with their own tactics. You can't just stand high and mighty saying we did the fair way and get trampled because, I mean, that's usually what Republicans do time and time again. But I hope at least Trump has learned the lesson to do this. The GOP has been lukewarm at best, if not outright disavowing him. I know Ben Shapiro, I know he's not a politician, but still one of the largest voices in conservative media, pretty much disavowed Trump's battle for this. And at the end of the day, like I said, I think it's the Republicans to lose because they do have an advantage in the courts, especially the highest court of the land, the Supreme Court. Trump has three different justices on there who, in theory, logically, would support him in any dispute. Now, again, we've seen how that turns out with other Republican justices. Don't forget that the Chief Justice Roberts was appointed by a Republican, but we all see how that's turned out. But at the end of the day, I think the Republicans have to realize, the Republican establishment, that if you want to maintain power, these people have no love for you, and that grandstanding on the fact that you played by the rules this time around, they do not care. And you need to meet them in the court saying, hey, it's going to be this way because we say it's going to be this way because you pulled shenanigans and now we're pulling our own shenanigans and you're going to deal with it. I mean, that's honestly what the Republicans have to do if they stand any chance of winning this. Or there's still a very narrow possibility the Electoral College could be tied, which would throw the vote to the House, which I believe would be the newly inaugurated House on January 3rd. So whether Republicans or Democrats control it is up in the air. Probably going to be the Democrats, but we could just get the ultimate chaos scenario where it is up to the House of Representatives to pick the new president. And in that case, we welcome you, President Pelosi. It's been nice. Good luck. But with that out of the way, I mean, there's really not much more you can say about that particular part of this.
Right. And, but one of the details that for me struck the most, and you mentioned it earlier, was the despondency amongst white men. And today was a particularly interesting day, although it began even yesterday, of people theorizing like what exactly would have happened had Trump better performed in 2020. And this argument has been presented in several different ways. One is that I mean, it's very rare, but some people are saying, well, Wignats didn't vote for Trump, but I doubt very much Wignats make up even 5% of the would be that 5%, and I think accounts that were formerly considered alt-right, like would also agree with that. They're not saying that they made up that. What they're basically saying is that Trump's tenure in the White House basically has demoralized white men, and they're right about that. He has demoralized them. But what I find kind of interesting is two possible scenarios, right? So Trump won by a fairly slim margin in 2016. Since we will never know the extent of voter fraud in 2016, and that's partly because he won. There was no interest afterwards.
Yeah, just a fun tidbit. They did determine after the fact that Trump technically should have won New Hampshire, but by the time they cast their electoral votes, it was said and done. But it was within a very narrow margin, and they determined that a lot of the votes cast in New Hampshire in 2016 were invalid, and the state probably should have gone to Trump, which would have made it a 3-10 victory by the time in the Electoral College. But like I said, once the other party concedes or the Electoral College votes, which is why we only have until December 14th before we figure out who the next president is, it's it's a moot point after that, because at that point you've already given up. What has happened. You can grandstand it all day, but you can't undo it. You had that small window between the beginning of November and the middle of December to contest any election results. But after that, I'm sorry, if you want to, sulk all day about it like, Al Gore, at the end of the day, it's like, and, I'll give Al Gore credit. He fought until the bitter end. But, like, after that day comes, it's there's not much you can do about it.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know why I began theorizing about this. Maybe because there was a lot of Schadenfreude from like accounts that like basically they're so bitter that Trump, betrayed us that they kind of relish seeing other people who had hoped that Trump would win. They want to see them demoralized as well. It's basically the story of misery loves company. But it did get me to think about something, and that is like, so suppose the Trump of 2016, 2017 is in power, and he creates a referendum on immigration. Let's say he wins it, and there's a massive cut on immigration. I mean, we saw with the fake Muslim, the so-called Muslim ban, airports completely filled with thousands of people. We saw judges turning against him. Let's just suppose, though, that somehow magically he could actually overcome that, right? Let's say also that, after his shithole comment, let's say that, he mentioned, why can't we get people from Norway?
And
Let's
cute
say,
brown women, let's not forget about that.
yeah, yeah. So let's say that he, actually could have carried any of this out. What would have been the reaction from minorities? I don't think if that Donald Trump was still in power in 2020, I don't think that minority votes would have been in his favor. And I completely understand that they're not really as significant as people claim from a general aggregate. Like, I understand they were pivotal in certain states, but broadly speaking, it's 3% for Hispanic women, 3% for Hispanic men, 4% for Black women, and 5% for Black men. Now, Black men have a reputation of hardly voting at all. Black women, on the other hand, have a reputation for voting quite consistently. Hispanics also not a great reputation. Even Democrats express concern about this.
Yeah, that's arguably what cost Hillary 2016 is the low Hispanic turnout. That was a big complaint in a lot of states, even though she did win a lot of the
Yeah.
Hispanic majority states, but perhaps kept her from winning somewhere like in Arizona.
So, but let's say that Trump does something so absolutist and is still within the framework of American law. Let's say he does it anyways, right? It would still be unprecedented. And I'm willing to bet that, the 2% bump that we saw from white women voting for him in 2020, I would doubt that there would be a 2% increase in 2020. I would argue that it would be even less than it was in 2016, because the kind of pandemonium that would cause and the kind of uncertainty that would cause, honestly, I don't think they would have the stomach for it. And
Yeah,
I think he would even have alienated white men. So all the things that it would have taken, to steer America, say, on a demographic front in a different way in 2017 would have created a situation where he would have had to have successfully done that, right? But again, the chances of being reelected in 2020 would have been very unlikely.
Oh yes,
So,
and
right? I
yeah,
mean, I could be wrong, but that's my hunch. That I guess what I'm trying to say is there was almost zero chance that Trump, in retrospect, I would not have said this in March, but in retrospect, it appears that Trump was never going to be a two-term president. Whether we're talking about Trump 2019 and 2020, or whether we're talking about Trump 2016, 2017.
I mean,
Right?
Trump wasn't a lose-lose, just to expand on what you were saying, because if he did take the drastic measures, we'll call them, in 2017, 2018, it would have turned off, again, a lot of the minority votes and not have significantly made up in the white vote. Sure, he may have gained the 5% more, but it wouldn't turn the whites into a voting bloc like the Hispanics are or the blacks are for the Democrats. Like, yeah, okay, you'd get 55 consistently for white Americans, but you wouldn't get that 65, 70 you need for have a voting bloc in the bag. So it was a lose from that perspective. And then taking the more moderate road that he did was also lose because he turned off a lot of the white voters and put it back down to the standard 50-50. And I think the biggest problem of this is Trump coming from where he was, which is fundamentally a Democrat or a centrist from the 1990s and early 2000s. He was proposing solutions that would have worked then, that would have solidified those uh, demographics, like his cuts on immigration, his so-called Muslim bans, etc. Those probably would have gone over very well. I mean, Bush campaigned on a lot of the same stuff. He just didn't deliver. For example, if Bush actually delivered on this stuff, I mean, he even campaigned for a border wall. And even Democrats, including Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, voted for that border wall. Fun fact. Uh, there probably would have been a shot there, but I think Trump, for
Yeah.
all the good things he's done, all the bad things he's done, is still stuck in the past in that regard.
Right. Right. So I think basically what you have is the some of the more racialist elements of the dissident right look at want validation, right, and that that Trump what didn't get reelected because he made white men despondent, and that's absolutely true. But it wouldn't have been the Trump that most people in the dissident right would have wanted. And I think and then that brings me to something else, and that is a lot of people are voting for Trump, for very different reasons than in 2016. Number one, they know none of this stuff is going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I'm
These
not
last
going to say what I said on Biostream. I vote for him because he's funnier.
right, but I think one of the people had a sense, I think, as far back as 2014, that you know something that they thought was part of their culture had been taken away. And this involved censorship, but it also involved a kind of flagrant promotionalism of certain very minority opinions about culture and sexuality and sexual identities, essentially being pushed.
Are you saying Gamergate won Trump the election?
Yes.
I mean, but you do have a point. Like, okay, that may be like
So
a
I guess
ridiculous thing, but in terms of like, yeah, culture was changing rapidly. That's more of a microcosm. That's more of a dumb example, but it's still like a very simplified way of saying that. But continue.
right. And so I guess what I'm saying is people even back then had different reasons, but one of the things that has been consistent is like, and I understand that after 4 years it didn't work, but and the goalposts keep moving in this like cultural struggle. But a lot of people thought in 2016 and 15 that maybe he might be able to do something about that, that he was able to address that. Now we know he couldn't. But the goalposts kept moving, and the reason people were still interested for cultural reasons why Trump should be reelected is because despite those things, not flipping in our favor, the sense of what the retribution would be for even daring to try, even for being a Trump supporter, became more obvious. I mean, these last 4 years are really about the mask coming off, right? And a sense of dread of what would be happening to us. And so,
I mean,
you
Portland
have,
got burnt down how many times over very milquetoast people, like these people who are, I don't know, they called them the alt-right, the people like Milo, what's his name, and You
Yeah.
know, all those like sort of e-slip types that were, oh, we're further right than the establishment GOP, just not by that much. Like they burned down Berkeley over those kind of people.
Right, and even I mean, even Cernovich, I remember posted. He said, "I'm outright because I understand that there's a war in white people." Now Cernovich actually tweeted that, right? I don't know if he ever deleted it, but like he's walked that back. But um, those are also one of the heresies that you could not say. So I guess what I'm saying is everybody knows what Trump cannot deliver, but people have a sense that Trump is some kind of a momentary bulwark against what is coming, and I think that is what scares them, right? Um, so essentially, what I'm saying is yeah, it is significant that I mean it's the most significant detail of this entire election is that 5% of white men, the second largest voting bloc, the one that comes after white women, um, did not, did not vote for Donald Trump. It's enormous. So there's a sense of hopelessness, um, in a sense that there's nothing that can be done now. Um, so, anyways, I'm not here to like disagree with everybody from that point of view. I'm just saying that people had reasons that, and I agree with them why it might be preferable to have Trump a second term because like look how seriously people spoke about an ethno state even into late 2017, even after Charlottesville. Like you can't look at the dissident right. You look at their tweets from 2016. You look at like the kind of things that we were espousing and saying 3 years ago.
Yeah, I remember the big break from civic nationalism where a bunch of people started writing it off saying, oh, we actually have to recognize differences between groups, something that just seems like, we take for granted now.
Right. So I guess my point on that is, well, if 4 years gave us this like realization that we're never going to have an ethno state, which was literally like one of the biggest, most important things to discover. Not that I didn't want one, but that was a pretty important thing. And a lot of people who we considered normies were already aware that that wasn't going to happen. So I guess what I'm saying is what would another 4 years have brought? It's speculation. I understand, but um, I think people have honest fears about what the world would be like under Biden and Kamala Harris.
Especially
When
foreign
everybody
policy
talks
wise,
about
which is
truth
the
and
other one I've seen
reconciliation,
thrown around.
what's that?
Especially foreign policy wise, which is the other one I've seen thrown around a lot. Oh, Trump, he
Right.
may not end the wars, but he didn't start any new ones. Like, yeah, I think a lot of people also fear a more interventionist United States under Biden, and rightfully so.
Right, right. And so people also fear like they might be more readily hunted down. Like obviously there's a limit. Like, if you're going to go to Charlottesville, you're going to get doxxed. If you're like really important, you're going to get doxxed. But you have people who are not like uh, as online, or they're not open in public spaces about it, because of course, I guess 2019 saw the end of that. And what you have is people feeling the sense that the noose is tightening. And uh, I don't particularly see why another 4 years of Trump is worse, because I think the Biden alternative is not great. Um, I don't get the sense that maybe some of the Antifa stuff will be crushed and dealt with, the burning, the looting. I'm not so sure how in control they are of that, but that's possible. How long do the COVID lockdowns last now? Initially, I thought Biden, it would probably disappear with the Biden victory. Now I'm getting the sense that, he would be much more in line with whatever New Zealand and England are doing, right? Um, So I guess what I'm saying is we're going to see probably more unmaskings and doxings and all kinds of things because the Democrats, as I was saying, they're talking about truth and reconciliation, about how to there's people very mad. This election, it showed that 69 million Americans voted for Trump again after 4 years,
And
right?
I will say, just to continue on your point, at best, a lot of people are going to get banned on sites like Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. And that's not even getting into where it affects your personal life. Just like to the point where, oh, you're not allowed to be on social media because you supported Trump or right wing opinions. Again, that's best case scenario, assuming these people don't find out who you are and try to get you, canned from your job or harass you outside your house. Which again, they usually reserve for people of slightly more importance. But again, like I said, just for the sake of being able to stay online and enjoy this show, for example, I'm very concerned, especially with the recent climate, that I'm just gonna get an email from YouTube saying, "Oh, your channel has been terminated." Like, by the way, you can find us on BitChute. I'll put those links below. I haven't showed that in a while, but yeah, if we ever do go down, that's probably our second base. You guys can find us, which, again, with the current ramping up by the tech companies, I am a little worried about, not too worried about, but with that as a side.
Yeah, so I guess what I'm saying is uh, I think it would be worse. Like it's never going to be a deal with Trump. They're still clawing their way towards us, as it were, but I believe it will actually accelerate under Biden because um, for them the present the threat is still present, and like we've said many times in the show, it's Trump's rhetoric. That's what they're afraid of. They're not afraid of Trump doing anything because essentially their decision after they saw that they could probably not um, oust Trump from office, what they got was the unison of militant activists, government, and corporations to work together, right, in order to like crush the spirits of basically 69 million supporters, if that's what it took. And if we saw like this kind of threat, like you're not going to vote for Trump or else we're going to burn the place down. And of course, if if Trump had gone, authoritarian, quote unquote, on it, if he had called that this was an insurrection, I don't know if we know what the outcome would have been. I don't know what the outcome would have been if several people were shot, because they're working from the premise that the police is racist.
Trump
You
is
know,
racist,
Trump is racist.
systemic racism, etc.
Right. Trump's troops killed half a dozen people this week. Trust me, it would have been very different. Like, Trump got all those bumps because he did nothing and said he would. Big difference between doing something and saying something. He literally got it by rightly pointing out that this was another basically mask, coming off the system. It's impotent. I get it, right? But what they're basically responding to is him saying it is actually Biden and Kamala that are doing this. Yeah, technically they're not giving the order, but if you look at the relationship with the corporations and the activists behind them, and who wants him out of office, yes, they are on the same side.
Oh
They
yes,
don't have
and
to work in unison. They don't have to coordinate and have meetings. They all want the same thing. They're going to come up with similar ideas, right? They know when to support each other. And so that's what people are essentially voting for, right? It's a difficult thing, I think, for a lot of people to understand, and I've had difficulty this week trying to articulate it. But it is actually him saying uh, that this is what the Democrats are doing, but him not doing something about it. I'm 99% certain that if he had, and that there were deaths by police, right? If that had happened, I think that would have been it. You would have seen white suburban women. They would not have gone. They would have voted him out. They would have said this has gone too far.
oh yes,
Like,
and this isn't even a Nixon scenario where Nixon did crack down heavily on the hippie movement, on the riots of the 1960s and early 70s. But again, that was a much demographically different country. Nixon was a much different kind of president, which, frankly, in my opinion, also a better president. And you know what the results of the 72 election were? He won every state but one, and of course, in Republican fashion, also lost D.C. But he to this day holds the record for the second largest electoral college victory after Ronald Reagan. That wouldn't have happened if Trump did that. It may have created it for Biden, but at the end of the day, Trump was in a no-win situation because he was proposing 90s and 2000s solutions for late 2010s into 2020 problems, and that's ultimately that's the worst thing about it at the end of the day. And I do think what got it a lot, even though he was impotent, he didn't act, was he gave validation to the people who felt the same way as he did, despite his hands being completely tied politically and not being able to act. Just the fact that, oh, the president's going to go stand out in front of the cathedral that almost got burnt down, brandishing a Bible or whatever. Oh, that's a real confidence booster. Or, oh, he's going to call out the people who are responsible for this. Like, I'm not saying that they're necessarily that gullible, but they want somebody who's important to express their feelings.
Right, and you could argue that the 5% of white men who didn't vote, essentially they figured out that it's not their country anymore. That's the big takeaway. That's the big takeaway. In 2016, they thought they could get it back. They still believed in their institutions. They felt that they didn't have to go through a civil war in order to win it back. And I think they found out that that's impossible, that there's no road to that. However, again, as I stated earlier, him pointing it out and doing nothing, people are going to hate me for this, but in retrospect, it was the right thing to do, because in a sense, Trump's appeal to people after 4 years is not too dissimilar to Farage, right? He is a kind of protest movement embedded into the system. And he makes them, reveal themselves. He makes power expose itself, right? He shows the divisions, and it's part of why they feel threatened. It's like his rhetoric. They know it doesn't actually have any power. What it does is exposes. It is still an argument of truth to power, no matter how goofy he is.
Which arguably that helps.
I think that's completely lost on some people on the dissident right. They're rage quitting. They're so upset. I'm sorry, but the Justice Party is not going to go anywhere. Like, it would need 2 generations of people that come after them that they don't even know who Mike Enoch was. Like, sorry. Like, if that offends people, I'm not saying he's a terrible guy, but I'm just speaking real here. It's tarnished.
Yeah,
and
there's no place for third parties in the current political paradigm, and rarely has there ever been, especially not now.
Anyhow, I mean, I understand their feelings are, well, yeah, duh, we don't expect anything until 40 years from now. But if there's one thing that this has shown is that, there was a way that you could get some, it was a small tick in the right direction. But I get it. Trump with the Platinum Plan, that's really there to appeal to white people, living in the suburbs with some guilt for wanting to vote for Trump. It's there to appease them. It's also there to, appease black anger, at the system, and at whites, frankly. I understand that it was all pandering, but all politics is pandering. And like I say, there's not going, once Biden is in, there's not going to be any kind of lever that exposes it, right? That you can't, like, everything that'll happen will happen in the dark. There's nobody that's going to be able to flip the switch and show what's going on. that'll happen in small ways, like BitChute going down, and that wasn't Biden, that was a Jewish group in England that did that.
Yeah, and
Uh,
honestly, the best we'll get under Biden is sort of like Obama, where it's going to be people like Edward Snowden, these dissidents within the system that pretty much sacrifice their livelihoods and might as well be their lives in order to expose the truth about these sort of things.
yeah,
And that's opposed to the president of the United States or a major figure in Congress doing it. And honestly, all I can really say about this is that it was a tanks in front of the Supreme Soviet moment that we saw in
mm,
'91, or at least I'm sure some of you did. I know you did. I definitely wasn't wrong for
yeah,
that. But which takes me to what I want to focus on. The second part of the show is the international ramifications of this election. Now, I think that's twofold. The so-called leaders of the free world in the United States had a completely dysfunctional and defunct election to the point where Brazil can count their votes faster, Italy can count their votes faster. These corrupt third world and second world countries, and even more corrupt first world countries, can have more organized elections than this past one in the United States. Which, considering the fact we have campaigned on democracy, literally fought wars in the Middle East over it, say that that's what we fought World War II for, it isn't really something that inspires confidence when it comes to that, because the bastion of democracy fails at their own system. And I know you can say the technicalities of the republic, but in terms of, I'd say generally liberalism, that the liberal hegemon is unable to properly do liberalism. And that was first seen in the election of Donald Trump, and now it's being even more seen in the attempts to remove Donald Trump. Now, from that perspective, again, we've showed those maps, I don't have them on me right now, about the desires for repositioning within Europe, how Germany and France have their plans to go their separate ways, regardless of who is president of the United States. They have plans beyond just, we don't like Trump. Now, several European countries have those plans and would renege on those given the opportunity. I think, like Sweden was one of those. Sweden would turn back to the United States if they had a better president. But again, big players like Germany and France have plans to go their separate ways regardless. Now,
yeah,
what I think we'll also see again is that shaking of confidence in the free world and the quote unquote democratic world. But we've hinted at this, especially when we talk about Syria, which we're not going to do that much in depth this episode. Probably one later in the week, if not next week. We're going to cover the more international news. Of course, Turkey. That all of these secondary and tertiary players and other major powers in the world stage are making very rapid moves in this sort of temporary power vacuum that's been created with the United States being focused so much in domestic policy. We've seen how much progress has come in Idlib under Assad and his allies' push into the final rebel stronghold of Syria. We've seen Turkey act very brazen in Libya, in Armenia and Azerbaijan with the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, and even still in Syria. We've seen Iran take moves to solidify themselves. Of course, they've been the usual things have been going on there. Russia and Belarus just signed an agreement to fully integrate their militaries. A lot of happenings in Europe right now with the European Union. Of course, China is continuing its massive infrastructure projects across Asia and into Africa and Europe. They're still building their new Silk Road. What is it? The road from Shanghai to Hamburg, about 1,250 miles long. So we're seeing a lot of these big players in the world stage, and even secondary players in the world stage, move very rapidly while the United States is way too busy to pay attention going to anything in the outside world. And like I said, at the very latest, we'll know for sure who the president is going to be once the Electoral College convenes on December 14th, because their word is final between faithless electors, all those sort of things. We'll know by latest then. We could know tomorrow, we could know in a few weeks, but like I said, that final deadline is December 14th. So, between then and any point to where things come to stability, in which case, again, we'll still have a lot of internal work to do before we can focus on the outside. It'll be at least until January if a new president comes into office, such as Biden. We're going to see a lot of these powers make their moves, make the moves that they have been sitting on that they have not been able to because of so much immense pressure from the United States. Now, of course, Macron and Merkel will sit in Paris and Berlin. The people in Brussels will say, they'll wag their finger at Russia for their actions in Ukraine and Belarus or whatever. But at the end of the day, they're not going to stand up to them the same way the United States would, especially under a Biden administration. So there's a lot of leeway for a lot of lesser powers in the world to act while the superpower is so concerned with its own internal affairs, is what I'm getting at.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the big ones we'll see. I think we'll see Turkey, especially. I think they're going to be the ones who make the most brazen moves out of all of this. I think Russia and China definitely will be. Not that they didn't in the first place, but I think with this, the conflict in the Caucasus may intensify, especially with Turkey feeling unsupervised. They may act a bit more, aggressively than they already are. I think France will see it, Macron, for example, especially with his recent comments about defending liberalism and secularism, will see the burden fall upon his shoulders, or at least from his perspective, think the burden falls upon his shoulders to be the leader of the free world in the absence of American leadership. So I think there's going to be some major shifts, even in that short period of time, that's really going to, again, lessen the influence of the United States. Now, whether those will hold or not, time will tell. But again, it's going to show, we're going to get a brief snapshot of what the world will look like without America as a superpower in the next few weeks here, which is going to be very, very interesting.
Yeah, with regards to Turkey, you could see that, Turkey almost like Erdogan kind of, it's almost like he knew. Like I would say, what Erdogan was doing in Syria prior to the coup attempt was basically, de facto what he was used to doing, and kind of like, America either looked the other way or encouraged them because, it was draining Syria. And that was a big help, it was helping ISIS, but, neither Turkey, Israel, or America have a problem with ISIS necessarily, especially in Syria. Except, maybe with regards to the Kurds. But, back then it was important basically to, crush Assad first. That was always the plan. And then grapple with ISIS, because with ISIS, of course, they could find ways behind the scenes to just up funding them. So that would have made the fight far more easy. And then you see Erdogan after the coup attempt, and he's a very different guy. He's kind of like seen the big landscape. He's kind of gone to the mountain after that, and he survives. And it was close, and he understands that Obama wants him out. And then he makes his move, and I think Trump and the kind of hysteria, and that's always like an interesting thing. Like we talk about like voter fraud, or just the faithlessness that we have, say, in voting in and of itself, or the institution of democracy. Well, to that you can add 4 years of people, claiming Trump was Hitler, hysteria, overreaction, deaths, several cities being burnt down, like just insane shit. And I think that gave kind of like a picture of like a very prophetic picture to the rest of the world about where actually America is going, and that the sense is it's not going to recover. People talk about like, Civil War II or the collapse or whatever. All that stuff doesn't really matter, because like it's never, like, every day is a day on the other side of the hill. But we've already reached the peak. We're not it's downhill from here. And it's just about managing that. And I think a lot of countries saw that. They just saw how incoherent it is, and that America would probably have very big, domestic issues going forward.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that accurately explains that regardless of who's president, why France and Germany in particular want less engagement with the United States, want a more independent foreign policy, willing to talk to other powers such as Russia, China, or an even inter-European bloc, through the institutions such as the European Union, despite still being very liberal countries and completely in line with the liberal regime. They no longer view the United States as a suitable harbinger for it because of how much internal strife there's been, how much even rejection of liberalism there's been at home. So I do think, again, this election is sort of the culmination of the past, I would say even under late Obama, like 2014, 2015, with the rise of ICE and everything, of what fundamentally is a loss of confidence in American leadership. And that's just showing, it's not just who is president, even though that's a big part of it. It's just that the institution of the American empire is becoming less and less of a reliable harbinger of these things such as liberalism, democracy, free trade, etc. It's no longer the Reagan era. It's no longer the Clinton era. People in these countries are starting to realize that we have to learn how to swim on our own. We can't rely on outside powers forever. And again, I think that is where countries like Russia, Iran, and China, and even to an extent Turkey, had a leg up over everyone else because they had already been dealing with an adversarial relationship to the dominant global power. So they knew how to maneuver a world where things weren't necessarily in their favor. Whereas countries, especially like Germany, maybe to a lesser extent France has always taken a less engaging policy, as we've seen with de Gaulle, etc. That, wow, we really need to learn how to navigate this world for ourselves in the event that the United States is ever an unreliable partner in that. And I think we're seeing all of that come to bear now. I think, as I put it earlier, we've had our tanks in front of the Supreme Soviet moment to the point where the days of the United States as a superpower, I'm not saying it's not a superpower anymore, but I think people are realizing that that could be over. It takes one thing to go wrong in the United States or abroad. Imagine if, for example, Iran genuinely attacked an American base or an American embassy or an American ship right now. How do you think this country would react? There would be no unity. A lot of people, I would say, and they'd be right to have these instincts. Oh, it's a false flag. Trump's trying to drum up a war to get us back, to keep himself in office, keep himself legitimately. So imagine if something, whether that be real or a false flag, came up right now with Iran, with Syria, etc. They couldn't handle, and that's on top of course, the election stuff. Imagine if, when inevitably either Trump is declared reelected or Biden is declared elected, the amount of chaos that will create. People are realizing that we are one major event of chaos away from being able to, not being able to project our power outside our borders, even just for a temporary time. And like I said, I think these next 5 to 6 weeks will be crucial in seeing what a world in a power vacuum where America no longer reigns supreme is going to look like.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely so. It's still going to be, I think, the reach won't be there, but it's, I think its supremacy will still be there in a diminished way, not unlike, let's say, the Byzantine Empire, because there are simply so many people invested in it. And, again, it's about the hard crash. And maybe one of the things, we've learned in the last 4 years is, maybe there isn't going to be an ethno state. There isn't going to be balkanization, because it's just the will isn't there. And maybe, because I think even before that, we learned like maybe America can't be saved. And maybe now we're learning that like, a kind of like very pragmatic, even more than usual, management is really like the only future we have. It will have to be just pragmatic, because it's not even necessary. I mean, it's still Homo economicus that we're dealing with. But how can I put this? It won't be really about wars over ideas. It'll just be war. struggles for survival.
Oh yeah, and I think the our best case scenario going forward is what one may call a snowy Brazil, a demographically mixed, politically dysfunctional, large country with quite a bit of natural resources and power behind it, but just can't accurately use those. And again, I don't know. We could see the base Latino takeover with the Castizo Cadillo, but I think if that's going to happen at all, that is a long way out. And of course, there is the possibility, and I don't necessarily believe in this myself, but I'm going to throw it out there just for the sake of exploring all the arguments of some sort of balkanization, would that be in an official capacity, such as California, Texas, etc., seceding from the Union, or an unofficial capacity where they all exist within the same Union but functionally are independent countries? So
Yeah.
there's a lot of options ahead of us. None of them look too pretty. A large power vacuum in the head, or we could see, and one of my biggest fears is, especially under a Biden administration, where American power and prestige is so diminished that we take an overtly aggressive stance that we probably haven't seen since the Cuban Missile Crisis towards our foreign rivals, such as Russia and China, and put ourselves in that sort of situation to the point where, like, historically, powers in decline have done this. They've tried to fight wars to reassert themselves. Think the Russo-Japanese War. Think the world wars in general. With all the various players there, and going back and back, and go back, even to the times of Rome, Greece, etc. But the big danger here is, and I don't think I even have to say this, is nuclear weapons. Okay, so Biden comes in, he may want to act big and bad and take action in Syria or Iran or the Balkans or even Ukraine, and Russia or China or whatever rival power steps in and says, no, you're not going to. That could put us back in quite literally DEFCON 2, where we're on the eve of a nuclear war. And that's probably my biggest fear out of any of the possible outcomes of all of this.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a crystal ball, but that's a future that's very likely. So yeah, there's a lot of assertion now. It really is kind of amazing that it's happening this quickly. You and I joke often, on Twitter or just in our own private discussions about acceleration, but in a way, it already is accelerating very quickly. It doesn't even need our help. We're just the peculiar thing is to observe it, I think, quite honestly and quite clearly, and really, ironically, not having the ability or the power to change anything.
Yeah, I mean, if you've noticed over the course of the show's history, you've gone to thinking we actually play a big role to more of just playing a role of we're sort of just making a weekly documentary on the state of the modern world. That's honestly what this feels like at this point. I like it. I like the format. I think it's a very valuable service. You guys really seem to enjoy it. You guys tune in every week. But at the end of the day, it just feels like we are a weekly diary for the modern state of both internal and geopolitics. Of course, mainly focusing towards one over the other, but still. And you know what?
Mhm.
I think we may be very valuable to historians. So, if any of you are listening to this in 1,000 years, I hope things are going well. It's a crazy time, and you know what? None of us really, we don't get to choose when we're born, but I have to say, there's worse out there, and I'm just glad I live in an era, despite all the pitfalls of technology, where I can be able to do this. Look, if I had to spend the end of the world with anyone, it would be you guys.
The same.
But I suppose, unless you have anything else to do, we can, wind this down. Anything else to say about this?
No, not really. I mean, I hope. I just hope I was understood what I was trying to say about Trump's value in 2020 isn't the same that it was then, and like Biden isn't really going to do anything different. All the things that we feel betrayed from having supported Trump, all those things are just going to go on anyways, right? I mean, Trump's presence is something that does it kind of expose the machinery of the power structure in the U.S. and just neoliberalism, generally speaking. And that's intolerable for them. And we shouldn't forget that. And I don't know what, another 4 years of that might have done, but it might be taken away. And I don't know what the consequences of that might be. Maybe it will wake us up even more. Maybe we'll be braver. Maybe we'll discover something else and find another path. But the truth is, I suppose, if this is a bookend, then I feel like I learned more from 2016 to 2020 than from 2012 to 2016. That's for sure.
I'll say this, in my relatively short life, I feel like I've learned more in these past 4 years than everything else combined.
Yeah,
And
same with me.
you know, what I'll leave you with is typically the historical beginning of a decade is not necessarily the year in which it actually begun. For example, people consider World War One the beginning of the 20th century. And honestly, I think in a historical standpoint, from a cultural and political
Mhm.
standpoint, we are at the end of the 20th century and the 21st century is just beginning, and it looks like we have a rough road ahead of us. So,
Yeah.
I guess I'll leave you with that encouraging message. But thank you everyone for tuning in. Hopefully, we'll be able to keep chugging along, keep reporting the events outside of the chaos of the election. So, we'll see you guys next time, and goodbye.
Goodbye and take care.